Hi, my name is Sarah Byam. I'm 63 years old. I'm disabled. I shake. I tremble. And this is my first podcast. So please forgive me if my voice is tremorous, when I stumble over my words. All those things are going to happen. And as they do, I ask you to stick with me. I have a story to tell, and I'm telling it because an awful lot of young people have told me it's time for me to share this. I write a Substack column titled Practical Hope in Hard Times. And if you think that the following subject isn't important to hope, you'd be mistaken. This podcast is called Why Be Good? And specifically, it's about how our labor gets stolen from our current lives and the consequences that has. I have a unique perspective, almost as an alien in my own culture, which I'm prepared to share with you in the weeks to come. I hope you'll stick with me as I get better at this. There once was a girl with a curl in the middle of her forehead. When she was good, she was very, very good. When she was bad, she was horrid. I learned that as a nursery rhyme as a child. But recently, a prominent politician asked why, if one was not afraid of hell, one would bother to be good. Having been raised in the most intolerant, unloving swath of the Bible Belt in the country, I was also trained that without fear of punishment, human beings would be evil. Really? What of empathy? What of the pain we feel when we see another in pain, or more importantly, when we cause pain to another? There's a tiny minority of the population that doesn't feel those resonant pains of others. And we have clinical diagnosis for them. Malignant narcissists, sociopaths, psychopaths, evil. And contrary to cultural propaganda that people would have us believe, those traits are extremely rare. And most people who act out aggressively in our culture or in ways that harm other people are doing so out of wounds that came to them at the hands of that tiny 1% of the population. The problem with that tiny 1% of that population is that they are gaining more and more control of our society every year. Gary Stevenson produces a podcast called Gary's Economics. He wrote a book called The Trading Game, which follows the chronicles of his life as an extremely poor working class English kid whose only gift was in mathematics. And he got a prestigious placement at a trading firm in London because he took a bunch of math games and solved them in ways that the judges couldn't figure out how he was cheating, because he wasn't cheating. He was indeed a math genius. And every year that he worked for that firm, he bet on increased wealth, and that those who were not in the 1% would lose more and more every year. He bet on wealth inequality, and he made more money than anyone else at the firm. He had to struggle legally to walk away. But when he was free, he tried to go to universities. They weren't interested in what he had to say. He tried to participate in think tanks. They weren't interested in what he had to say. And so he began this podcast. And the master theme of the podcast is tax wealth, not work. Because we are being taxed by capital, by corporations, in such an enormous percentage at this point in history that it's eating up the time that we need to love one another and to participate in our own culture. So Gary's invited other people to start their own podcasts to spread this message. You can also find a podcast called Barry's Economics. Consider this the first in Sarah's Economics. I have a unique experience on American culture because I was raised as an invisible slave in a working class neighborhood, in a middle class family where there was no economic need for it whatsoever. The captors who raised me invaded my privacy, my sexuality, my physical labor, my voice. There was no limit to the intrusion into my person they felt entitled to. And it is that entitlement that I'm speaking about. Because people who are willing to enslave others are also very likely to be willing to enslave their children. From age 5 to age 15, I was a slave. I freed myself legally. And at the time, they told me it was the worst case of child abuse they had ever seen. The psychological, physiological, and emotional trauma I underwent left me without a single scar. But my digestive system doesn't work. My nervous system doesn't work. I have underdeveloped muscle coordination, muscle atrophy, all of which my parents were warned about when I was a child because I wasn't developing properly, because I was undernourished and overworked. Didn't change anything. I had to account for every bite of food I ate by the amount of labor I'd done that day, the amount of water I sipped. I was reminded daily that nothing I used belonged to me. I was forbidden to sing. If I got accomplished at anything, I was then forbidden to do it. Music was a requirement at my school. So because I was forbidden to sing, they chose the musical instrument I was playing. And no matter how good I got at it, I could only rise so far because I was not allowed to attend performances or extracurricular activities or play with friends or use the telephone or watch the television or listen to music or any normal human thing. I also didn't get any of the nurturing required for the emotional development as a child. So when I left, I was book smart, but I had no idea how to be a human being. And the reason that I can tell you that most people aren't evil is because the world I was taught to be afraid of wasn't there. I would not have survived but for the kindness of strangers who raised me like a baton passed from one person to the next person to the next, correcting my socially awkward behavior, correcting my misperceptions of the world, constantly correcting me. That people were patient enough with me to do this was remarkable. And interestingly enough, I found myself most accepted among the poorest and immigrant communities, which now, knowing what I know, no longer surprises me. There are those who practice evil out of ignorance from the fear and damage caused to them during their developing years. But I'll tell you, bullies are cowards. They can't survive without victims. And the easiest way to stop a bully is to walk away. In all honesty, I'm not sure any of us stand up on our own 2 feet entirely. We need each other. And I was never scolded for not doing enough after I left home. Now, maybe that was because I was raised to labor and labor and labor until I collapsed. But I collapsed again and again and again. And every time I collapsed, someone from my community picked me up and cared for me, no matter what it cost them, without question. It's amazing how incredibly kind human nature is. All the anthropological evidence we have of human beings shows that human beings survived not out of competition. They survived from their cooperation because they cared not only for their children, but also for their lame and for their elders. That we found in the records of their bones. And there are cultures and civilizations far, far older than our own that managed these things in a way that was compassionate and fair and not exploitive. The Romans perfected the concept of empire, and then those that inherited from the Romans exported it to as many places as they could, invading cultures that were established, balanced, and far healthier than their own, enslaving the people of those cultures, and as far as they could, eliminating those cultures. Suffering is not normal. Pain is normal. Pain is part of human life. Being born is painful, dying is painful, growing is painful, learning is painful. We can't grow and mature without experiencing pain and then triumphing over it. That's not suffering, especially once we're mature enough to understand that that's how life works. Suffering is when life is out of balance so badly that we don't have enough time to care for each other and to care for our community. So, what could be so evil that it's designed to steal our time and turn it into gold to put into someone else's pot? In my generation, we interpreted these things as individual failures. That's also propaganda. Because I'm here to tell you, the merit scholars I went to college with, most of us were working class poor kids. 80% of us didn't graduate from college because the funding for poor kids going to state schools was eliminated 2 years after Ronald Reagan was elected. Part of a long-term plan to gradually undermine the advances that we'd made in the United States with human rights since the election of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Project 2025 is just the culmination of that intentional plan. Kindness is so part of the human experience that we only notice the lack of it as aberration. And I want you to think about that for a minute. We notice evil because it's aberrant. Kindness is the air we breathe. Like fish, it's the water we swim in. And we only start to notice it when it's scarce, when it gets polluted. What could be so horrible as to create a scarcity of love in the human heart? That human beings become irrational, that they're no longer able to feel their own feelings or feel the feelings of their neighbors. If you stir some hate and hunger and desperation into the lives of a human being, and you eat up all their time, and you threaten the survival of their children, and then you tell them the people responsible are the neighbors that look different and that pray different or speak a different language, you've got the recipe for divide and conquer. I'm not going to go into the number of historical occasions in which this has happened. I can only tell you that it's been done over and over and over again. And every time they do it, they get better at it. And so it's our turn to learn to stick together, because that's what it's going to take. That's all we've got. That's the only way we win, is if we stick together, if we start to take care of one another. And so what I'm proposing is that we build bigger tables instead of higher walls. Each of us responds with a visceral gut reaction to unfairness. I'm proud of my American neighbors who are standing up to ICE because they can't just sit by and watch it happen. So I'm going to say this. If you come for one of us, you come for all of us. Else, how could I face my ancestors? Because to be kind is to be human, and to be cruel is inhumane. Take care of each other. I'm Sarah Bynum. I hope you have a day that enables you to celebrate some part of your life. That's my wish for you today. Thanks.